drive, his four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the Jews was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla. I'm a killed. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Crossed the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. Of travel I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Hey, good evening, everyone. I'm going to turn that volume down just a little bit. Hey, good to be with you again tonight. I have to say that I'm coming out of being under the weather here. Had a bug for the last 24 hours. Fast moving. A lot of people I know have had this fast moving stomach bug. Anyway, I did my best to pull some clips from Senate Finance today on a subject that we'd talked about previously, and I think is really important for people to understand. This legislature has before it a bill to reinstitute a defined benefits plan and a retirement system, right? And ours has been closed since 2006, and we still owe a whole bunch of money on it. About $8 billion, $8 billion. And this presentation that we heard today in Senate Finance is interesting. I pulled a couple clips. I tell you what, if you don't like amortization schedules and finance specific investment conversations, that type of thing, this meeting would have, put you to sleep. But it's important. Anyway, so I pulled a couple clips. I hope that you'll get a flavor of what happened in Senate Finance, and then there's some takeaways that I think we need to talk about. So jumping right into the schedule here. This first clip's from near the beginning of the meeting, so let's jump right to it.
This first slide is hot off the press. I was able to ask our actuary Gallagher to get it to me a little bit early. I received it on Thursday, and it'll be in the March ARM board packet. And this is a fundamental pension funding equation. Everything coming in on one side has to equal everything going out on the other. At our assumed rate of 7.25%, everything coming in on one side, everything going out there, at our assumed rate of 7.25%, both sides balance, $17.9 billion for PERS, $8.3 billion for TERS. Now, you might wonder how the equation balances when we still have an unfunded liability. It balances because the contribution projections on the left side already include the payments needed to fund that unfunded liability.
Okay, so I'm going to pause there for just a second. I want to explain what's happening here, if I can, in layman's terms. So what is Senate Finance is being presented by, I forget the gentleman's name. Forgive me, because that's I should have that written down. But the gentleman is the chair of the ARM board, the retirement board that makes decisions on compensation decisions annually. What he's saying is that the projections have the $8 billion. It's the $8 billion of pension liability paid off into the future. They're projecting, all of their system is projecting that that'll be paid off into the future, and it balances. Okay. So we've got this giant unfunded liability. And it's going to get paid off. Okay. We'll keep that in mind here as we have a conversation.
The actuarial calculations build those payments in, so the system is in an actuarial balance. What the 7.25% does is account for time, the time value of money. If we owe millions of dollars in benefits decades from now, what's that worth today? If we assume we can earn 7.25% on our investment between now and then, we need a lot less money sitting in the account today because we're counting on decades of compound investment growth to do much of the heavy lifting.
Okay, so here's one of the things that a defined benefit system can do, and a defined contribution system can do. You put in a few dollars now, and then over time, the 7.25% is the target return on investment. So you take your limited dollars that you put into your retirement system now, what comes out of your paycheck and what your employer contributes, you put it into a fund, it gets invested, and then over time that money grows. So what he's saying is, because there's this debt that exists, you can rely upon the 7.25% as it's a number that they picked, and there's a reason for why they picked it. You can rely upon that number as your return to get you the result that you want, which is to pay off that unfunded liability, that liability in the future. Okay, so that's what they're saying. It's not just your payments in your employer contribution and your employee contribution. Those are not the only thing that's going to cause the unfunded liability to be paid off in the future. It's also relying upon getting 7.25% investment return over the life of the fund, over the life of that debt. So if you get that wrong, then you don't pay off your unfunded liability.
So these numbers look smaller because the expected investment earnings are embedded in the math. They're invisible.
Okay, jumping right to this next clip because it follows up on this conversation that he's continuing.
This slide came from a collaborative request from the ARM board and our chief investment officer, Zach Hanna. We asked the actuary Gallagher to rerun the exact same analysis, same system, same benefits, same contributions, but discount at the 2.5% inflation rate instead of 7.25%. When you discount at just inflation, you're saying, don't give the investments any credit beyond keeping up with inflation. Show me what things cost in today's purchasing power. That makes all the future numbers much larger, which is why the PERS goes from 17.9 billion to 32.3 billion, and the TERS from 8.3 billion to 14.5 billion. No money appeared or disappeared, the equation still balances. But here's why we wanted to see it this way. Look at what shows up as a separate line item that was invisible on the previous slide. Inflation-adjusted future investment earnings. $12.7 billion for PERS, $5.7 billion for TERS. That's the investment return that was hidden inside the discount rate on slide 3, and now you can see it.
Okay, so the previous slide that we looked at, up at the top, it said 7.25%, and this one says 2.5%. And he was highlighting the numbers right there in the kind of in the center of the screen. This says 12.7 for PERS and 5.7 for TERS. What that number represents is 12.7, I believe that's billion, and 5.7 billion for the two funds, PERS and the teacher's retirement TERS. And those numbers are what we will need to earn in our investment earnings in order for this to balance, in order for us to be able to pay off the debt that we have.
See it. If you look at PERS, current assets at 12.3 billion, future contributions 7.3 billion, future investment earnings 12.7 billion. Investment returns represent more than our total current assets. They represent more than all future contributions combined. TERS tells the same story. $5.7 billion in expected investment earnings versus $6.5 for current assets and $2.3 in contributions. I think the takeaway is clear. Meeting our 7.25% return assumption is an important piece of funding these pensions. The Department of Revenue investment team is critical to the overall success of this system. That's why the ARM board takes the investment return assumption so seriously, and it's why the rolling return data I'm about to show you matters.
Okay, some of the concerns we've had is that targeted rate of return has been much higher in the past and has been ratcheted down.
Is this
When we go back in time, if we go back a
Senate Finance
decade,
Chair.
go back decade and a half, go back 2 decades, and look at where we're forecasted to be today, we are not where we were forecasted to be today. So there is some concern on that subject. As an example, you know, according to this presentation here, if all the assumptions hold true, we would be in balance. We wouldn't be growing an unfunded liability. Is that correct?
This slide is showing paying off the unfunded liability in the time frame with this. So those future contributions include that to pay off the unfunded liability by fiscal year 2039.
So if we go back 10 years and look at the presentation then and go forward 10 years, the concern is, like I mentioned earlier, talking to you, the PERS, well, I can do TERS because it's easier. TERS is the identical number, $1,629,000,000 in 2015, after we put in $1 billion extra. In 25, it's the same number. It hasn't moved. The PERS has actually increased in liability, and we've spent a couple $1 billion since then. So there's a disconnect between the results we're seeing here at the table to retire that unfunded liability and the projections being given us over and over again. And it's not a derogatory statement. It's just there's a lot of variables going on, and apparently there hasn't been enough contributions to retire the unfunded liability over the planned schedule.
So what happened in the past? We used to have a number for our investment earnings target that was greater than 7.25, meaning legislators and ARM board in the past had said, hey, you know what, we think that we can shoot for, and I don't know what the numbers were set, but they were greater than 7.25. So for example, they say, hey, we're going to get an average of 8% return on investment in our investments for the fund. So if you don't make that 8%, if you didn't make that 8% in the past, which they didn't, then you end up with not enough returns, not enough investment earnings to make up the difference to reach that level of obligation or the debt. You can think of the $8 billion that exists now for pension liability as your obligation to pay, right? So you have to have a lot of returns in order to make that, be able to pay that obligation off. Well, in the past, we had this high rate of return, targeted rate of return that didn't materialize in every year. And so we weren't able to earn enough, and therefore the debt kept, like, there wasn't enough funds to reinvest and to benefit the length of time that you have, the decades that you have in order to compound that interest. We just didn't have enough money. You didn't earn enough money in your investments to be able to pay that bill up. Now, they also changed an amortization. I'm not sure if I've got the clip for this, but they changed the amortization from a 15 to a 25 year. Okay. So this is basically a 15-year note to a 25-year note in layman's terms. Okay. So what that did is it kicked out your length of time, lowered your minimum payment, kicked out the length of time that you have to pay off your debt. So all of our 2006 and earlier debt is all in this 25-year amortization. Well, what I've found out today is the reason that we've seen, one of the reasons why we've seen an increase in debt in the pension liability is because you got to be paying on this for like 20 years before you start actually before you can even reduce that debt by half, it's like your 21st year or something like that for half of your debt to be paid off, meaning they're front loading all of the interest. So for the first 13 years, you're paying nothing but interest, or pretty much that's all it is. So, or in layman's terms, what it is you're making your credit card minimum payment for the first X number of years. Okay. You're not even making enough payment to pay all the interest that's being earned, or interest that's being charged in that time. So you're adding interest to your debt for many years until you're actually able to. So that's one of the reasons why our pension liability has grown. And I think if I understand correctly from the ARM board, we should, with some changes that they've made, I think we should see that that stop, or at least come down. So they've reduced and this isn't this year, this is in the past, they've reduced their targeted rate of return down to 7.25%, which is much more reasonable. And they've switched the amortization for new debt, or the new amortization schedule is a 15-year amortization, which means you're going to pay it off sooner. You don't pay as much interest. Okay, let's go to clip number 3.
This table illustrates the mechanics of two methods on a $1 million unfunded liability with a 2.75% payroll growth assumption.
This is what we're just talking
Under level
about.
dollar, which is like a standard mortgage payment, you pay a fixed $82,000 every year, and the balance continues to drop. Under level percent of payroll, the early payments are smaller, $64,000 in year one.
Okay. Let me set this up. Level dollar is what you would normally think of for your mortgage payment. You're paying a set dollar figure. It's $1,000, whatever, $1,000, $2,000, $1,500, whatever your mortgage payment is. You're sending that off to the bank every month, and it never changes. It's always the same. Okay. The level percent is a percentage, and this is where the legislature said, you know what, we got to make a change because we got all this, we got to put these $3 billion into the fund, and we can't afford our defined benefit system is basically what it is. And so they said, what can we do to help afford this? Well, we'll change this to a level percent situation where we're sending the payment into the future so that future generations can have to pay for this, right? So anyway, two different, that's what they're talking about here.
And they grow over time with payroll. But notice that in the early years, the liability actually increases because the payments aren't covering the interest. After 13 years of payments, the liability has only dropped from $1 million to $900,000 under level percent of payroll. So if we add a $1 million layer of debt with 25-year amortization, the debt increases for 6 years, and after 13 years of payments, we still owe $900,000 of debt on that particular layer. If you continue to look at this, you'll see that you can make payments for 21 years, and you have to pay for more than 21 years to pay off more than half the debt. And I'll just say that the ARM board found this troubling, the effects of this. And I think this is one of those things that you're making payments, but you're not seeing the progress that you want to see.
You can see up at the top here that one of the assumptions that is baked into this plan is that there's a 2.75% annual payroll growth. And what this means is this number is actually shrunk. The ARM board has made a decision to reduce that number down to 2.75. It used to be a higher number. And what this assumption is it's saying because we know that there's going to be payroll growth going into the future. We're making this assumption that there will be payroll growth going into the future, just inflationary payroll growth. There's going to be legislative decisions. There'll be union decisions, contract decisions. So there's going to be payroll growth growing into the future for these employees. So they're going to be earning more money in the future than they're earning now. So we factor into our system that the employee will be making more through this payroll growth percentage going into the future. That means there's going to be more future dollars to invest out of someone's paycheck, and you're basically setting the system up so that it requires employees to be paid a certain percentage more a decade from now for it to work. And if the employees don't end up being paid that much, then you aren't collecting. It would be similar to your investments not performing the way that they should be. You didn't collect as much as you said you were going to from your employees. So then your unfunded liability grows because you didn't collect enough. So this is what the legislature said was, well, we'll just, or maybe it wasn't the legislature, maybe it was the ARM board in the past, said, hey, we're going to set a figure that's unrealistic on what the payroll growth is going to be, and it'll look good and everything will balance, but we'll have this problem that what happens if you don't have that payroll growth. So when you have conversations about defined benefits systems and you say, what matters is the assumptions that you make within the plan as to whether the plan is actually going to work. You know, Representative Kopp's pushing this plan and he says, hey, you know what? This thing balances. This is going to save us money. We're going to be able to pay this all off. And the only way that he can say that is a point in time, a snapshot today. There are assumptions that are being made. And as long as all of those assumptions remain accurate 2 decades later, when people retire from their job, as long as those assumptions remain true, then this plan will work. Okay. And what history has shown us, for our current defined benefits plan is the assumptions that you make didn't pan out. They weren't true. Because, I mean, who's making the assumptions? Humans are, right? We're wanting to sell a plan and create a defined benefit system that we want to work. We want a majority of the legislature to pass, so it has to look good. Future generations get to figure it out when it doesn't actually work. Anyway.
But should we not be making progress? Or is this...
What I will
Go ahead.
What I will say to the chair is that this is one of the biggest differences between 25-year amortization and 15-year amortization, which the board moved to. So you have a policy on layering with 25-year amortization. You pay for 21 years, and you're paid off about half the debt. And with 15-year amortization, you pay for 15 years, and the whole debt's paid off. And so one of the concerns the board had is that with 25-year amortization policies, not on the original debt from 2014, 2015, but on new layers of debt of experience, you're pushing a lot of debt way off into the future. And so paying off those, if you have an experience that is negative, a new layer of debt, paying it off over a shorter period of time makes a lot of sense actuarially.
So this is what our legislature has done in the past, and this is, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, but I will continue to beat this drum. I have to pause here and say, look, what we're dealing with and what we've been dealing with our legislature is nothing different than what we're dealing with in Congress in Washington, D.C. A quarter of our federal budget is debt. Okay. We're not even, we're spending more than we bring in taxes in the federal government, to the tune of 25% of it. 25% of our total spending is debt. Okay, we're financing it. We're pushing the cost of our government off to the future taxpayer. Similarly, with a defined benefit system, with our retirement plans, we're setting up a system where you push the cost of retirement for paying for somebody's retirement off to the future, and you have to have the returns that you project, and you have to have the growth in payroll that you think you're going to have, and the economy has to perform exactly like you think it's going to perform. And if you don't, future generations will have to pay the difference. So you've taken that liability, that retirement liability, and you've pushed it off onto future generations. And why is this important? Because we're talking about creating a new defined benefit system that will have different levers, and it'll look different than what we've got. But fundamentally, that's what it does. It takes a few dollars today plus a projected return on investment, and then that pays out in the future. And if it doesn't, then the state and the taxpayer pick up the liability. Whereas our current defined benefit or defined contribution system says we take money now, investment money from the employee and from the employer, it gets invested, and then whatever that return is, that's what your retirement is. If it's less than what you wanted it to be, then that's on the employee. It isn't on the taxpayer to plus that up to a certain level. Because who in the private sector has this? When you put money into a 401k, do you get to retirement age and they're like, hey, you know what? There wasn't as much money in my 401k as I had wanted. I think I need to contact the government, and they're going to plus me up. They're going to find some taxpayer dollars from my grandkids, and they're going to plus me up because my retirement check's not big enough for me. That's what we're saying with the defined benefits plan, is our government employees don't have to rely upon the decisions that get made in the state and in the country in order to have their retirement check. Meaning your fiscal policies, your voting, your cost of government, all of those decisions that affect the economy, that affect what happens over time in our country and in our state, those state employees are held harmless for that, because the state is going to pick up the check for the retirement, whether the investment earnings are enough or whether the payroll increases are enough. The state will be on the hook for that liability, and it'll have to pay it. Constitutionally, in the state of Alaska, it has to pay it. Every other state, you've got a pension liability, it has to be paid. So your defined benefit system that's going to go to the governor's desk, right? It's going to pass the Senate here shortly, and it's going to go to the governor's desk, and I hope he vetoes it. Because we can't know what the future is going to hold, and a defined benefit system is the wrong mechanism for taking care of employees for retirement. It's not fair to the non-government employees and to the taxpayers. It's not fair. Okay, I got one more clip here.
Talking about some things that we've done that have increased the cost this year, but we feel will save money in the long run. Fiduciary responsibility also means making harder decisions. 2 adjustments increasing near-term costs but are designed to save money over the long term. First, the payroll growth assumption. For years, the system assumed payroll would grow at 2.75% annually, but the 10-year average for PERS and TERS has been significantly less than that. When you assume payroll will be bigger than it actually turns out to be, the dollar contributions you're counting on in later years never fully materialize. Updating this assumption to match reality improves the accuracy of our projections. Second, the shift from 25-year to 15-year layering for new unfunded liabilities. Under the old approach, payments were heavily backloaded. These changes come from the same fiduciary discipline that produced the cost reductions I previously described. So, in 2006, the ARM Board adopted a 25-year schedule to pay off unfunded liabilities with level percent of pay by 2030. But by 2007 and 2008, contribution rates had surged to unsustainable levels. Fairbanks was facing PERS rates of 180% of payroll. Anchorage School District saw TERS rates jump from 26% to 54%. The legislature responded by capping employer rates at 22% for PERS and 12.56% for TERS, with the state covering the difference. In 2012, the board adopted level dollar amortization to be more aggressive. That's like your mortgage where you make the same payment.
And I just want to point out to folks that the 2006 original plan that was created by the legislature, they didn't create it with the intention that they would have a crisis in 2007, 2008. Like when the legislature voted it in, when they agreed to it, they were being told at the time that this is going to be a plan that balances itself. It's going to be funded, and you're not going to have an unfunded liability. It's not going to have these problems with your local municipalities not being able to afford it, right? The assumptions and what's being sold, what the legislature and the decision makers are being sold is something that sounds good at the time, but ends up not being good in reality, because you can't predict what the future is going to hold. So this is the problem you get when you set up a system of assumptions that ends up the assumptions not through any fault of anyone, right? Because we're just making the best decisions that we can at the time. We're just, hey, this seems like the best thing we can do, but we don't know that the assumption we're making is actually going to pan out. We don't know because we can't read the future. So who is left holding the bag when that happens? Well, in the case of a defined benefit system, it's the taxpayer that gets the additional taxation to pay for the defined benefit for the retirement.
Same payment every payment. Then in 2014, the legislature made two important moves. It infused $3 billion into the system, and it changed the amortization method back to level percent of pay while extending the timeline from 2030 to 2039.
So those are the clips I pulled today, and I would encourage you to go to KTOO's Gavel, Alaska website if you want more, and find the afternoon, I think it's probably a 1:30 meeting of Senate Finance, and watch the whole meeting yourself. It's interesting because the moves that the ARM board has made make it sound like we're being responsible and we're going to have the $8 billion unfunded liability paid off by 2039, assuming all of our assumptions that we're making are going to be correct, right? I think anybody that's looking at voting and agreeing on a defined benefit system ought to be looking at this and saying, do we really want to go creating another system where we could add to that liability? Is this really the right thing to do? Kind of a summary, a technical summary. The long amortization policy decision to amortize this over 25 years led to or contributed to the liability, the growth in the liability. Using a level percent of pay method, that front-loaded or backloaded the payoff, right, to future years, maintaining a higher assumed rate of return, which I think 7.25% is probably a better rate of return. I don't have a real big problem with that, but I mean, if you went lower, you'd have a higher probability that you're going to get your return, but you wouldn't make as much. Like your system wouldn't work. Your system would not pan out. Somebody would have to pay more in the short term. maintaining your higher assumed returns during your earlier projections has contributed to this higher liability. Allowing the payroll growth assumptions to be overly optimistic, that was a problem with the current system that I hope is, and because we've adjusted our payroll projections now, doesn't mean that a new ARM board, new governor appoints members of the ARM board, so new ARM board can come in and change projections. They just change them and make new assumptions. So I don't know. What do you say about our current problem? How do we explain it in layman's terms? Our defined benefit system, pension liability, depends heavily on investment earnings, right? If the fund doesn't earn as much as expected, the shortfall becomes new debt. That's it. Okay. And the state is going to have to pick that up from taxes or from permanent fund earnings or something. Okay. Early years of this system, the early payments were structured too lightly. So for many years, the state paid similar to making minimum payments on your personal credit card. And we weren't keeping up with the interest. So it was adding to the debt. We assumed the payroll would grow faster than it did. And we stretched out our payroll payment schedule, right? And so that adds to the debt in the future. Again, many of the assumptions that we're making were overly optimistic. Again, you have to think about finding 21 and 11 votes in the legislature. If you don't make optimistic assumptions, the plan doesn't look great. It looks better when you use optimistic assumptions. If you use realistic assumptions, then there's greater risk. And so you're like, I don't want that. Let's make the marketing plan needs to use rosy pictures because people like rosy pictures. So I think there's plenty of reason in this meeting for why Governor Dunleavy needs to veto this defined benefits bill when it reaches his desk, because I'm pretty sure that the Senate's going to pass it. Like, it's a foregone conclusion in my mind. So I'm hoping that Governor Dunleavy will veto that bill. And I think they've got the votes to sustain the veto. I don't think they've got enough people in the legislature that are going to override the governor's veto on this bill. So I'm optimistic that he will veto it and it'll stand, because this is a bad decision for the state of Alaska to go back to a defined benefits retirement system. So anyway, let's check here on chats. Coming out of this illness, this is what I've got for you tonight. Lisa says, similar to the oil per barrel price, assumption is never correct for the future. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's not the same thing as a funded liability or an unfunded liability, but you're right. You're making a projection. We're basing our budget off of X dollars of oil, price of oil, and X projection of how much oil we're going to be producing. We're forecasting, and that's all that this budget is this year, right? We're working on the fiscal year 27 budget, and we're spending money that we don't have yet. We're spending taxes that will be yet to be collected based on the production amount of oil and the price of oil. So if those numbers don't pan out, then we have a problem, right? This is one of the structural problems that we have with our budget in the state of Alaska, is we're heavily dependent on those factors from one industry. Many other states, when they've got a broad-based tax of some kind, sales tax, income tax, it's from a broad swath of the economy. And so one portion of the economy might take a hit, but not another portion. And so it's more resilient. We don't have resilient in the state of Alaska. We're looking to permanent fund earnings to give us a little bit more resiliency. And we've got a 5-year look back on what we can spend out of the permanent fund earnings. So that gives us a little bit of resilience, but we're still subject to swings in the market for how much earnings we're going to have off of our permanent fund. So, I mean, you see the analogy here, right? Whether we're going to be able to pay off our debt in the future for defined benefits relies heavily on whether investment earnings pan out the way we think that they're going to pan out, and whether we can fund our state government. This is what we're setting up right now with the permanent fund dividend going away and state government being funded 100% by permanent fund earnings. That's where we're headed. That's the status quo. We'll be heavily reliant upon whether the economy, whether the stock market, whether the economy continues to do well or not. And in the time when it doesn't do well, then our tax dollars come down. Totally disconnected from the non-oil economy in the state of Alaska. That's the system we're setting up. Lisa, defined benefits are similar to that due to numbers that will not hold true. Yeah, history has proven that the numbers that we assumed don't actually pan out in some cases. Now, what you will find is that over a longer period of time, the investment earnings for the ARM board that the ARM board has projected meet the 7.25. So those projections and the investment earnings, our actual earnings, have been over time greater than the 7.25. So from that policy's perspective, that number has been right over time, not right every year. And they've got a smoothing system that factors in the highs and the lows with regard to the investment earnings. If you had a year where you have low investment earnings, then you might have a corresponding increase in employer and employee contribution rates. Well, they've smoothed that out over 5 years so that a year of low or a year of high doesn't impact the employers as nearly as much as it would if it was on just an annual basis. So, but the point that I'm getting at is the 7.25% is something that we have been able to reach in all transparency and truthfulness. That 7.25% is something over time, over the length of the time, that we have been able to reach. But if we don't, the liability goes to taxpayers. How much time, you're asking? I think that the conversation here was shown from about 20 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. I'm in my mind's eye, I'm trying to get the first date on the graph. I want to say it was 20 years, but I know that they're projecting, when they project out, they're projecting out 15, 20 years. Their amortization schedule's out to 25 years, but the earnings that they showed in the meeting there for the past, I think, was 20 years or so. I don't know. I'd have to double check that, but it's a significant amount of time, and they're not wrong. Like, over the length of, if you take since inception of the stock market, for example, there's been lots of peaks and valleys, lots of highs where investment earnings have done really great. And then when the stock market has done really poorly, there's been major crashes, right? But since inception, if you look at the graph, it looks like something that's going like this, and it's continuing to grow. So that's why people feel comfortable putting in place a system like this that says, hey, it doesn't really matter if the state has the liability to pick up the oopsies, the what happens if we don't have the investment earnings, because that's not likely to happen. You look at your trajectory of your investments going into the future and you say, well, it hasn't ever happened yet. And so we're always going to continue to grow. Okay. Well, do you want to saddle your kids and your future generation with a debt that they didn't vote on, that they didn't take, and bank on the fact that what we have now is going to continue in the future, that there's not some unforeseen circumstance? I don't think that's wise. I don't think it's wise. I mean, it's why we should be afraid of debt, personal debt, government debt. We should be afraid of it. Like, it should have a specific purpose for a specific period of time, and this current generation should pay it off. If you want to build something large and you want to use government to do it, or private industry or whatever the cost is, needs to be repaid by the current generation. This nonsense of passing on to the next generation our debt. That's what we're doing at the federal level. We're everything from defense spending to Medicaid to Social Security to everything that the federal government's paying for, 25% of it is financed. It's debt. Our future generations have to pay for it. It's not even like there's a project like a dam or whatever, like roads. There's not infrastructure necessarily. I mean, some of it is. Some of that spending goes to infrastructure, but much of it is not infrastructure. It's government services. It's being spent in Minnesota, in California, and Alaska on stupid projects that are fraudulent and not necessary, right? And 25% of all of those dollars are future generations have to pay for it. So I really think that we need to have the conversation from a fiscal policy perspective that says, if we want something, then this generation needs to figure out how to pay for it with this generation's money. Don't require the next generation to pay for it. They're going to have problems of their own. They're going to have things that they need to do and they need to pay for, and those decisions will be on them with their money that they have created, the wealth that they've been able to create. Why do we saddle them with burden solving our problems with their money? Like, it makes no sense whatsoever. It's wrong. It's just wrong. Yeah. Hey, look at that. I've got my daughter watching a political podcast. Good on you. Hi, Melanie. Pretty Little Lies versus the Ugly Truth, Kevin says. You're right. And you know what? Legislators, just like most Americans, would rather face the pretty lie than the ugly truth. That's probably just human nature, right? I don't know if I need to go any further than that, but we really do want to hear good things and we don't want to hear bad things. This is no different people in the legislature. I'm just checking through the meetings here, or the text messages. Deshauna, passing on generational debt is irresponsible. Yeah, it is. And this is why elections have consequences, because we've got people in both at the federal and the state level that are like, it doesn't matter. We just saddle up the debt, and from fundamentally, Americans over the generations now are super comfortable. Personally, individually, we're super comfortable with running up debt. Credit card debt, auto loans, house loans, we're maxed out, living paycheck to paycheck. So is it any surprise that the people that we send to our legislatures would start to think about government spending in the same way. It's no surprise. We are the legislature. We send people that look like us and talk like us and spend like us to the legislature. They make the decisions for the state. It's wrong. Okay, so what do? Like you've got an election coming up. Ask these candidates. Ask the candidates where they stand on generational debt. Should we be passing on costs of our living to future generations? How would we be doing that? Well, at the federal level, it's a balanced budget. If you're not going to commit to a balanced budget, then you're going to pass debt on to your future generations. What's happening with the permanent fund dividend? You take a dividend from a child today, and that's earnings that they will not have over their childhood and over their life of whatever they wanted to invest it in or whatever their parents were going to invest it in, if they wanted to put it in a savings account for school or whatever. That child doesn't get that. So that's a future generation that doesn't get it. The dividend goes away. Future generations don't get that benefit of a dividend. So we're literally saying this current generation needs all of the permanent fund earnings for our government. Future generations, the only way you get to benefit from permanent fund earnings, from being the owner of the resources, is through government services. Your roads, your schools, that's how you get to benefit. It's not going to be through no taxation, because that ain't going to happen. Government's going to continue to grow, and they'll be demanding a tax. They'll be demanding a tax. I can't see the future. I don't have a time machine, but I'm really, really confident that it's only a matter of time before the legislature says, you know what? Everybody else has got to pay their fair share. We need more. The permanent fund earnings are just not keeping up with inflation. Education's too important, and we don't have enough money out of the permanent fund earnings. We need a tax. It's coming. It's coming. You can bank it. Bank on it. Current generation is the one that's going to benefit from the permanent fund earnings right now, because we're going to spend it all on government. If you roll the ERA into the corpus and you allow inflation and low returns, years where you have high inflation and low returns, and you allow the legislature to spend from the corpus, then you will be eroding the principle of the fund, and that will be stealing from future generations. That also is before the legislature right now. If you combine the earnings reserve account with the fund in a constitutional amendment that the voters have to vote on, if you combine it and it doesn't account for years of high inflation and low returns, then you will have allowed the legislature to spend the seed corn, spend down the principal in years where your investments don't pan out and where you have high inflation. That's what will happen. Lisa, from what I have seen, our legislatures are trying to explain away taking the PFD to pay for SNAP, Medicaid, and other items. No, that's exactly what they're doing. It's everything that some people want government to do. So when I came into the legislature in 2019, we were not paying for daycare. Now the state budget is paying for daycare. In my lifetime, I didn't think that the state government needed to subsidize daycare. You know why? You know why some people think that's necessary? Because we don't have a growing private economy. What we need is for our economy to be growing so that people can have earn progressively better wages and afford daycare. Or maybe if we had the kind of economy where a family could live off one earner. Should that be the goal of the legislature? Have an economy where only one parent has to work. I think that's a good goal. You wouldn't need a budget, a state budget, to include millions of dollars for subsidizing your daycare expenses. If they actually cared about the private economy, how could you measure whether they care about the private economy? Okay, well, your capital budget, which is investing in infrastructure, that infrastructure would lead to opportunity for economic activity, reduced cost of electricity, better roads to places where natural resources need to be extracted, right? Infrastructure that enables economic activity. If that's what the legislature was focused on, then you could say, hey, they care about private growth. But our capital budget is kind of an afterthought in Juneau. What takes center stage is all of the special interest groups that come to Juneau wanting money in our operating budget and some service that the state provides. That's why I say you got to find some way for the legislature to care about your non-oil private economy. Craig, good evening. Thanks for joining us. Future generations won't know how to spend money as well as Kathy Giesel does. Oh, maybe she's unique, but I think people will be able to figure it out. It's up to us to kind of set the stage here. And I don't know that this current generation is setting a very good example to the next generation about fiscal discipline. Like we're setting the wrong example. I'm not meaning just the legislature, right? I'm meaning, broadly speaking, living beyond our means is setting the wrong example for the next generation. But yeah, you're right. Anyway, folks, that's what I've got tonight. Thanks for joining us. That's really a downer thing to say and end the evening on. I hope the younger generation's listening and you do better than we did. Like our fiscal responsibility at our state and federal level and our demand for government spending is not your solution. You need an economy and you need to work. That's what you need. You need to focus on growing your economy, not growing your government. That's the best advice that I think I could give you if you're a younger generation. And anyway, folks, have a good night. We'll be back with you tomorrow night, and I wish you the best. Again, if you want to catch this entire briefing, go to ktoo.org and look for the Senate Finance PM afternoon meeting. It is somewhere around 1 o'clock, I believe. Doesn't matter. They've got a 9 o'clock in the morning AM meeting and a PM meeting. You find it and you can watch the whole episode. So yeah, that would be interesting. You know, I've talked to her about coming on the show and co-hosting with me. I'm not sure whether she's still on or not, but maybe one day we'll have her sitting here next to me and we'll have a conversation and see what's on her mind. Anyway, you guys have a good evening, and we'll see you again tomorrow.